Yeah, it takes it a few seconds.
Okay.
And we are live, evidently.
Yay.
Welcome to episode 78 of the Comic Watchers Show. I'm your host, Matt. With me, as ever, are Nick and Mike, and we have some special guests with us this week from the Comic Watch family and extended thereof.
Thanks for joining in, everyone. This is the Comic Walker Show live on Saturday.
It looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with our host, Matt.
Yeah, evidently. Sorry. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah,
Okay, that was super
doing
weird.
The drag thing.
In here, I thought that was a Skype problem.
It's an Oklahoma problem.
We have much larger problems than that.
Yes, you guys do. Yes, you guys do.
But so while I was frozen, did everyone say hi? Intros? No? Maybe.
Not really.
No.
More or less.
Well, we know Ross. Here comes. Hold on, we got one more joining us. Not who I thought it would be. I'm happily surprised.
Like a mystery.
A mystery. Well, I think it's Arby.
Oh, wow.
Is it audio only?
I believe it is. Arby, are you there? I don't know. Maybe he's there, maybe he's not. So we're talking indie comics this week. What constitutes an indie comic? What are your favorites? Where do you jump in? It's kind of a live free-for-all, so hence the extra voices, because who doesn't like a few extra voices in the conversation? But yeah. Indie comics. Well, how do we want to define an indie comic? I know I have a rather broad definition myself, and I just kind of collectively count anything that's not big two as an indie comic. But more specifically, what do you guys think?
Nobody.
Radio silent.
Not everyone at once.
Well,
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, well,
Yeah,
let's go ahead. You're
I'll
the
go
part of the plan. Go.
For me,
Somebody
an
say
indie comic is just something that is not through a main publisher. It's usually like creator-owned content, and with that, it's not your typical superhero stories or any sort of like typical genre like that. It has to be something outside of that realm. But it seems like you ask anybody and everybody has a different opinion on indie comics.
True story.
Yeah, some of that like hesitation on to jump even into that question is like, how do you? It's such a deep question. Like, where do you even start with that?
yeah, the last couple of days I've been thinking about it, and the more you think about indie comics, the broader the context gets, and the things that you add into it. I mean, you start off with things like Boom and da and black and white comics, but then I started thinking today, when I was a kid, I was reading 2000 AD. For a lot of Americans, that is an indie comic. I was reading war comics that our next door neighbor who'd been in the war had collected. There was a comic in the UK called Action Force Comics. It was basically G.I. Joe for the UK market. They took all the same characters, but they changed all the nationalities to sell it over there to the UK market. But to me, that's also an indie comic. You understand? It's such a broad thing. And I think the thing we touched on in the conversation in chat the other day is that the property is what makes it indie, not necessarily the publisher. So things like The Walking Dead, things like Once and Future, things like black and white comics, all the Kickstarter stuff that you're seeing now. There's a new one every day. All of those things can be put somewhere on that scale. And that's what I actually think indie comics is. It's an actual scale of properties.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's an interesting point. Like, Preacher, for example, owned by Garth Ennis, Steve Dillon, but published through DC. Do we still count that based on the ownership quality of it as indie?
Yes, because because the property is indie. Never mind where it started. The property is indie. Understand?
Okay.
I mean, it's odd because think about we said earlier, maybe not general superhero comics, but then where would you put Invincible?
Right. I was actually thinking that.
That is Image's straight into Cape Comics. That is their alternative to Superman, to Spider-Man, to
Right.
But to me, that's an indie comic. It's an indie property. It exists outside of those two big two that we spend so much time with.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk too much. You guys must also talk, please.
Yeah. So Duna Holler coming all the way joining us from Spain. What do you think?
Okay, so I was thinking about this today also. Like those days we kind of just pre-discussed this, and I feel like I put too much like weight. Like that's not necessarily like a thing that everybody should do, but I personally put a lot of weight in who does like the material work. Like for me, it feels like it's more on the scale of indie, even if everything can be indie from like to Invincible. But for me, it's more like on the scale of, yeah, this certainly is, I don't have a doubt. If the material work is very few people, if like this is like an effort to take something that is small and try to make it bigger through a few people that like put a lot of work in it or something like that. So that feels more indie. I don't know if it's more indie. It just feels personally. And I was having doubts because I like was recollecting some comics I had, and I just realized one of the most looking indie comics I had, like it seems super indie, which is Not on My Back by Sina Grace, is by Image. Like it's a publisher, even if the edition is by very few people and the way of doing it is like it only has one person, two people working on the comic and one editing. That's all. It still is Image. Like it still is a big, somewhat big company.
Yeah,
So
but
it's difficult. It intertwines.
Yeah. But I mean, Image is just a distribution company pretty much at the end of the day, right? It's not necessarily like it's a publishing company. So they're not coming up and creating these ideas. They're going to smaller people and trying to get them to go through them to distribute their materials.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're going to come up a lot in this conversation just because, like, that's their ballpark, right? They're looking at creating content a lot of the times. I mean, a lot of the major titles we'll talk about, like Walking Dead, Saga, it's going to come from Image. And that's just
Monstrous.
Monstrous.
Yeah.
There's so many. The list goes on. And, like, now you're seeing companies like Ross had mentioned with Boom and all these other ones that are coming up. I'm going to talk a lot about Vault. They're kind of playing in that same ballpark where they're doing this creator-owned content, and they're kind of like this amalgamation of all these different creators in their own pursuits.
Definitely. Cody, better late than never. Thanks for stopping in. So since you challenged me on my perceptions of what's an indie comic, let's hear it from the horse's mouth. What do you think is an indie comic?
I mean, for me, it really boils down to who owns the property, right? The property rights are really crucial to me in how I evaluate what could be considered indie versus what's corporate. So that to me means DC can publish indie stories, indie comics. The publisher and the distribution isn't really that concerning to me. It's more about the creator and whether or not they can tell the story that they want to tell and make the money they ought to off of it without having somebody else like come in and like with Batman, right? Anybody can write Batman because Batman is a corporate owned character. He's a corporate owned IP. Nobody in the right mind is going to write a Sin City story, right? Nobody's going to just walk in and pick that up and say, okay, here's my Sin City or Bendis and Max cover. Nobody's picking that up from them to put this out. That was a DC distributed book. It's fully creator owned. I don't know. To me, it seems like there's a lot of gatekeeping and elitism when it comes to talking about indies. And I'm not for that. I'm a punk, man. Like I really hate
Yeah.
And like, I'm gonna put a question here. Like, what do you think about the opposite? That means writing a very like famous story, or like, for example, Teenage Mutant Ninjas, or like Buffy, but in an indie publisher with very few people working on it, and authors that are not well known, and like probably putting much less like I don't know how to say it, but like less publicity on it, and more like in an indie way. Is that indie?
I don't personally look at any of the licensed products and adaptations as indie. I personally don't. I don't look at Buffy as an indie comic. I don't look at Boom as an indie publisher, honestly. Like they have some indie books, but they're not in and of themselves indie. And Eric Larson dropped on the Twitter thread that I had going a couple weeks ago, and said if you're corporate, if you are owned by a corporation, you're probably not an indie publisher. And that's true of all of these, right? Like DC is owned by Warner Brothers, Marvel is owned by Disney, Dynamite is owned by Dynamic Forces. Like all of these various corporations that own these publishers, but that doesn't mean that the publisher can't put out indie work. But I mean, when you were talking about licensed products, these IPs are owned by industries. They're IPs owned by corporations. So Buffy is super corporate. I just don't find that super indie to me.
Scoop, come on, what do you think?
Yeah, you've been very quiet. Seriously, so.
Taking notes. No. I mean, it's kind of, I get the whole Sabrina, Buffy, and, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if that's your thing. It's a joke in there about the turtles. But anyway, no, I just think if those properties, those are national properties, but to me, I think it would be different if Marvel was doing the turtle story, right? So I think when you have a company like IDW that can do that story, like when Splinter died, IDW is not bringing back Splinter. Marvel would have brought back Splinter in three issues and then rebooted the storyline, and we'd be right back where we were. Splinter never died. Who's Jenica? We don't know all that stuff. But I mean, I get that, but I think indie for me is like, and I'm more along the lines with Matt on this one, that if it's not Marvel or DC, you see a lot of these companies like, Avatar, IDW that have that, image that can really just have that creator-owned product, but they don't have that limitations of what you can do with Hal Jordan, what you can do with Superman. And it's just nice when you read these books that you don't have those limitations, not saying that Marvel and DC aren't doing good stuff. They are, but at the same time, there is something different about when you're reading a She comic from Crusade or something like that, and then you're reading versus like Wonder Woman or something. There's just those differences, and I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a nationally owned product, and IDW is just shipping out their books. But I think IDW still being, quote unquote indie, I think I would still consider that somewhat an indie book. Not completely indie, right? Because obviously anyone can jump in on it, like Cody was saying. But I think now, to me, that would be kind of, it's kind of like bleached flour versus regular flour. Still flour. Just imagine how you want it.
Well, and I think control is a major component as well, because and I'll use Eric Larson as an example. He's fully in control of Savage Dragon, right? Has been for almost 3 decades. The book, lives and breathes completely according to what he wants to do with it, and he's answerable to nobody in terms of content, and that suits him just fine. So control of what happens with it is very important.
Yeah. And like
Same
with
thing with Todd McFarlane, although Todd
oh.
Nope.
But
Froze.
yeah.
I think like that discussion even with IDW is like whether this publisher is indie or something like that. I think it's kind of tough to label a certain publisher as indie. Like I said, I think it comes into the property because they're dipping their toes into a lot of different things. And when you have licensed property, it's kind of hard to not have that editorial oversight that the creator-owned projects don't really have. And that's a really big deal in how you're looking at how these books are produced and then how they're released. It kind of makes that distinction for me and really like what kind of freedom is allowed with this book. And you know, when you get into indie comics, you do feel like it's something very different. Like Scoop said, it's something that it feels different. And like when I first joined Comic Watch, excuse me, and started doing reviews, Cody had mentioned like indie reviews are different. They have these different standards because they're a totally different beast almost. And when you jump into indie comics, I think it is something that, like, you're a longtime reader of DC, it doesn't really carry over like that. And it happens like that from a creator standpoint and the lack of oversight, and a reader standpoint and what they're bringing into the story. And I think that dynamic is kind of what creates the indie feel.
Yeah, most definitely. So now that we've got kind of a generalized idea, at least, or maybe more confusing idea of what an indie comic is, where do you all think is best to start jumping in to indie comics? Rock?
Well, that's the thing with it. You can jump in anywhere. There's no long history of continuity to have to deal with. You can go say, that story about that interests me, I'm going to try that. And that's the pleasure of indie comics for me. I mean, I've read, like I said in our last show, I've read more indie comics in the last 2 years than I'd ever read before, because I've been exposed to it more. But it's easy to pick up. You don't have to worry about knowing what happened 50 issues ago. You're usually starting fresh. Even the long ones, even Saga. Saga's, I haven't caught up completely. I'm only on 30-something. But it's finite. There's nothing before one. There's no history. I don't have to know that this did this or this character did this. And that's the joy of an indie comic. You can start absolutely anywhere.
Yeah.
As for recommendations, that's a different thing.
Definitely. And I honestly, like, personally, with the big two comics or anything that falls within that realm, it's so intimidating to get into because there's so much backstory. And to be fair, there are a lot of people within the comic industry that try to give you a hard time if you aren't caught up with every fucking book, you know? Like, so it's, can I curse?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay.
Well, we're there now.
Yeah. But I mean, as far as
We are live. So.
It's just so easy to jump into literally anything. I follow a lot of web series comics just because it's, with my career, it's so hard to keep up with like actual paper books. And even sitting in my office, I can go through and read at least 10 or 15 comics while I'm on my break at work, compared to, like, you know, going to the store every week and hitting up my local LSC or LCS and getting all my books on my pull list. And it just, that even when I fall out of that for like a couple of weeks, it's so daunting to get back into it because I have all of this back material to catch up on in order to just be ready for the next week.
Duna, how about you? Where do you think is the best place to jump into indie comics?
I think that depends on like what type of stories do you like. Like, as they said, like every indie comic you can start at the beginning and that's it. You don't have to have any background. But it depends, because I get, for example, I usually recommend Monstrous for people who are like trying to get into something different than what the big two do, just because it's very different. It's like a different style of narrative, a different way of telling, a different pacing. but I get it's not for everyone. People can get bored by a book that is dense, and so for people who are more like, I want to read something like very like more easy to read, I usually recommend more like, I don't know, melodramatic comics that are like very get you in the way. Like I think Snot Girl or Ghost in LA, like those kind of comics are like you are 2 pages in and you're already kind of laughing with it. But I think it depends a lot of like what people like. But I think it's like there's material for everyone. There's very dark comics. There's very enthusiastic and brilliant comics. There's like depends on where you want to get. I don't know. I also like usually go into a website that is called Tapas, like no, TAPAIS.io, and it's a website where you can like search comics by genre, and like you get like everything that's coming out from like people who publish their own comics online, people who are, and also from small publishers. There are small publishers that get the first issues there, so you can discover new stuff. I usually go there when I want to discover something and I have run out of recommendations or something, but I think also it goes by word a lot, like asking friends what they like. That's a big one. And review pages.
Yeah.
Cody, what about you? Where do you think folks should maybe start with indie comics?
I think to kind of crib off of both Ross and Duna a bit, like we exist right now in such a great time for comics. Like the death of the industry, as so many will have you believe, has really been more of a dispersion of sales. So you look down the list on Diamond and see, 300 through 350 are selling better than they ever have. So we're just not so top heavy anymore. And that means that there is a comic for everybody. Like there is something that you're gonna like out there, no matter what you're into. And so, I mean, for me, yeah, just read what you want to read. Follow a creator you like, especially follow them from the mainstream into their indie work, because you are gonna find gold if you do. I have some gold that I've discovered recently, actually. We've got The Wilds from Vita and Emily Pearson. Got 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank from Rosenberg. And The Devil Within from Stephanie Phillips, who's my rising star for 2020. And I think she's going to blow the roof right off of this industry.
He's betting on it.
So, I mean, these were all creators that I was already familiar with and properties that I wasn't. And they're all just stellar. Like, they're all super good. Black Mask? Yeah, Black Mask Studios. Putting out some killer work. So, yeah.
Well, and a lot of times, I've found, especially like over the course of the last decade or so, that when a writer that I like makes that transition from one of the big two to focus more exclusively on indie works, specifically Rick Remender.
You got in there, buddy.
I'm back. I don't know what's going on with my internet today, guys. I apologize. And that's not to badmouth anything that, Remender, Millar, or Brubaker, or any of these great writers that I like did at the big two. But once it seems now that the focus for a lot of writers has shifted from, coming up through the indie world and then staking your claim at one of the big two to the exact opposite of that, and using your success at the big two as a...
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
I have something to add, but okay, when...
I don't know. I'm gonna log. Hey, you guys keep this going. I'm gonna log out and come back.
Definitely. Go ahead.
Okay,
Dylan.
I gotcha. Yeah.
I think it's also like important for that say like Mike said that they are jumping onto indie books, and I think it's also because right now indie books are getting bigger because of the like Netflix shows and stuff that is producing of them, like The Walking Dead got bigger because of the show, because it got into TV. And I feel like a lot of indie properties are now getting onto that because people are excited about new ideas in the audiovisual media. And we have already seen like a lot of Superman movies. And maybe when someone gets something like new in a Netflix show, they're like, oh, I'm gonna watch this. And then maybe I get into the comic if I like it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of
That's
studios.
that might connect with like Boom now has a deal with Netflix, so maybe we're getting a lot of those. I hope.
Yeah, I think everybody's realized that these smaller publishers are massive IP farms, and that there's money to be made. They've come to realize that they can make money off these properties. I mean, we haven't, Mark Miller was kind of one of the first guys to do it with Netflix. We've yet to see a single program from him, but they're coming. You understand? There's 3 or 4 in the works, and that's going to be that's money spinning for Netflix. People are familiar with that's going to attract the big 2 people, the Marvel people. They know him from his Marvel work. They know him from his indie work. So you're attracting a massive viewership by knowing who this famous writer and all he's done. And that's why, and I think that's why things like Boom are doing very well, is because people have realized these are money making businesses we can exploit. I mean, exploit sounds a bit harsh, but I mean that's what it is.
It's true. Like the whole IP generation in comics has just kind of created this whole new wave that coincided with our accessibility. So it really kind of helped open up comics, and like Cody said, it helped disperse sales like that, but also, what we consider comics and webtoons and things like that, and then them finding new life at Netflix and Hulu and all of these adaptions. I mean, Vagrant Queen is hitting sci-fi now, and again with Vault, I'm gonna keep going.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I think like that to me is like an indie comic and like the potential of what it can be. And I think that's ultimately like what the medium can offer, and outside of what the big 2 can do with it. And we're seeing really cool things with it.
It's doing what anime did started doing years ago. Basically, indie comics is actually starting to replicate that formula.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's something I kind of wanted to mention. I don't know if it falls into this, and that like manga or comics too. And that's like that was a lot of people's introduction, I think, into Western or mainstream comics. They're reading different properties. Some of the best superhero stuff is My Hero Academia. So your entry into comics can be so different and kind of out there for people who are just like reading Marvel and DC, But I think like that's a great way to get introduced to it, is all of these different properties and what they're able to do with storytelling. We're about to get a One Punch Man live action. People are going to read the manga looking for that, and then and then they're going to be able to like discover the comics medium, because manga are comics too. And you follow into this that feels like an indie property, and it just kind of teaches you how to navigate indie comics, because it can be daunting itself.
Well, let's roll it back a little bit. I mean, if you think about what indie comics were, let's start talking about when Image popped its head up into the industry. Let's roll it back to there, because what we have now and what we had then are 2 very different things. I mean, I live in Africa. I was not exposed to the black and white comics era at all. You know what I'm saying? There was nobody here putting out indie comics back then. Image was an indie comic to me when it first appeared. All I knew was I knew DC and I knew Marvel. That's all I knew. And then there was 2000 AD and the odd other thing as well. But I mean, if you roll back to there and look what we have now. I mean, I had no idea there were so many other publishers out there. And I mean, if you think about it, to call Image an indie comic thing, it was all of those first properties were all superhero properties. They all, all those guys, they were all Cape Comics. I mean, they might have had a couple of different ideas, but they were all these guys' takes on superheroes at there. And it's from there, it's evolved into something that is so beyond just the superhero genre. It's completely different. I mean, I don't think of Image and think of superhero comics. I don't know if any of you do. I never have. But I mean, you think Image, the first thing that comes to mind is?
Spawn.
Saga.
Monsters.
You see what
Any
I'm
other
saying?
answer besides Youngblood is wrong.
But that's because you're still living in 1990 something.
And we're having fun doing that, Ross. Thank you. Yeah.
Cody, you?
I mean, what? Wildstorm's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, so you still come from that.
Yeah.
That.
But I mean, I was also there at ground zero, right? Like I was buying up Image. I was 12, 11 or 12 when Image launched.
You would have been around about 12. Oh, yeah, I would have been 13, 14, maybe a bit older.
So I mean, like I was there at ground zero buying up everything I could because these were artists that I, followed. I mean, I wasn't buying much Spawn, to be perfectly honest with you. Spawn didn't do much for me, but all the Wildstorm stuff, Gen 13,
Gen 13 for sure.
Stormwatch, Wetworks, like all of that kind of independent universe within the Image universe. I was absolutely captivated. And then they started getting guys like Gaiman would pop in. Alan Moore had his run on Wildcats, and then Ellis comes in and just blows the roof off of the thing. Like to me, that was one of the most exciting periods for comics.
We actually got a comment from someone watching it on YouTube, Joanne Germanata. Sorry if I mispronounced that. What indie comics would be best for young adult readers? Any suggestions?
For young adult readers.
Young adult readers.
Oh, I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. What is the age rank? I want to be sure.
I don't know what young adult kind of maxes out at. I'm not sure
18.
Is it 18?
16 to 18. Just call it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, let's just give it a number there.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure. Maybe for people for like 14 to 18, maybe. I think BB Free, which is releasing right now, BB Free is a really good comic, and it's like also like very fantastic, very like to get into, like very universe. Like I don't know, I like it. It's just starting. It's the new 3, but I think it's gonna. I don't know. It's gonna be a great story. And it's very positive, and it's very like I don't know, it has a very like hopeful and cheerful message overall, and it's interesting. It's not like cheerful but boring. It's like very interesting.
Yeah.
And very complicated.
10 to 14.
Joanne said 10 to 14 mainly. I read the first issue of BB Free, and I think it would fall into 10 to 14 range just fine.
Yes.
It's
yes,
so
totally.
What's
I
the
think
imprint
totally.
that Boom has? Is it Boom Box that does Over the Garden Wall and Lumberjanes and all those books?
Yep.
Like, I think that would be anything from Boom Box. That little
Totally.
imprint of Boom, I think, would be right in the right wheelhouse.
Yeah, I think when I was like 12, I would have loved that comic. Like 12 to 15 or like something like that. I would have loved it. I love it right now, but like
yeah.
Boom is by far, I think, the most like young reader friendly publisher out there right now. Like they have so much, and I mean, it's multivalence, but they have so much that is geared towards young readers. And I think that's really fantastic because we got to start cultivating this next generation of fans. or eventually I'm gonna die.
No, you're not. You're going to be pickled forever.
So this show just took a weird dark turn.
Okay, let's talk about vampires.
Mhm.
We went from indie comics and then the founder of Comic Con, someday I'm gonna die, so let's pass on my suggested reading list.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, even if you go look at Oni has also got plenty for young adults. They've got multiple imprints. I mean, they've absorbed Lionforge. I mean, it's one company now, and I mean, I'm not good with pulling names out of my head because I don't read that particular those types of comics anymore, and my daughter's not interested in them. If it doesn't have the Simpsons in it, she's not interested. But there are plenty of young readers' imprints out there. You just have to go look for them.
Yeah, I totally agree with Cody and with Ross. Like Oni Press and Boombox, those are two great names for getting into like any title. Like if you like the cover, that's my main like. Show the covers to your kids, and then
don't go look at Goodreads though. They recommend Hellboy on the young adults page. Anyway.
Hey, they got.
I liked Hellboy.
No, so do I. I love Hellboy.
Yeah, Hellboy's amazing.
When I was like those ages, I liked it. So
Hellboy Pancakes, great young adult. It's one page. I can absolutely recommend that for a young adult. Like, it's so good. And then in a few years, you can get to the later Hellboy stuff.
Yeah.
But okay, I mean that's a good enough trend. Our host Matt seems to be really having some internet issues. He has exited for the time being. We'll see if he can come back. But it's a good time as any to go ahead and transition into some recommendations. I know we talk a lot about all these different publishers and what they've got going on, and kind of where you can find your entryway into them. But I kind of wanted to see what everybody what are y'all reading? What kind of indie books do y'all suggest based on your own preferences, or are there any that are just automatic suggestions to anybody?
Yeah, depending on age group. I mean, I'm reading Undiscovered Country. Yes, it's a big book, but it's one hell of a book. That for me is probably my favorite indie at the moment. I mean, it's Snyder and Sewell, and it's an absolutely amazing book because it actually doesn't know what it is yet, but it's all these things all at once. And I'm fascinated with Americana, and this book takes all these sci-fi elements and it's actually packing them around Americana and the philosophy of those things like red, white, and blue, pink Cadillacs, and all of these things that you associate, or typically being outside of America, associate with America, and actually turning it into a mythology, which is just, I've never read anything like it. So that for me is a current book that I'm reading would definitely be my recommendation.
Every day I feel a little bit more like we're living in undiscovered country. So so yippee-ki-yay.
This is not Clorox.
Yeah.
That's
and see, Matt, that's why I keep telling you, you got to move to the Eastern Shore.
Heimlich.
Scoops, what do you recommend?
A constant go-to. He doesn't do comics anymore, but Trent Kuniyaga does a lot of video game stuff now. But he created Creed. It's about this kid, Mark Farley, who discovers a dreamstone, if you will, and he enters and he can kind of control dream dimensions. But the twisting is that he's just like a regular dude. Like he just wants to impress this girl that sits next to him in like his math class and stuff like that. But the cool thing about Creed that kind of turned me on as a teenager to him is like they were just doing multiple crossovers with other books that I was reading, like Ninja Turtles and stuff like that. And so it's just he does like 2 or 3 issues at a jaunt. and they're super easy to find. They're like in every dollar bin now at your comic shop, but really worth it. And then anything, of course, anytime you can read a She book by William Tucci. That's really good stuff as well. But yeah, I'd probably say that my constant go-tos is probably going to be like Creed, She, No Hero by Warren Ellis. And anything really that Warren Ellis does off of like Avatar and stuff like that. Black Summer, No God, stuff like that. Really, really, really dig that stuff. Warren Ellis and Juan Jose team up a lot between those three books, and it's just really, really good stuff. Once again, you can find a lot of this stuff in, if your comic shop is having the big sales, they're usually in dollar bins, or hey, grab, stick your hand in a box and you're probably going to pull out some really good stuff by these people. But that's, like I said, those She, Creed, anything by Warren Ellis or Juan Jose from Avatar is constantly what I'm reaching for as far as like indie titles and stuff like that.
Cody, how about you?
Well, currently my favorite is Butcher of Paris from Dark Horse. That's Stephanie Phillips. Again, Stephanie Phillips, read her stuff. It's awesome. I'm pretty big into war comics, and ways that we tell kind of these historical events in narrative. So obviously, any of Ennis's work outside of the big two almost always has to do with war, and he's the best war writer possibly ever. So Sarah from TKO was just an absolutely marvelous read. All of his like old what was it called?
War Stories.
Matt, help me out. The one about the World War I British fighter pilots.
Oh, crap. I'm drawing a blank too. I know what you're talking about.
It's killing me. Anyway, I will echo Scoop with all of Ellis's small imprint stuff. Like that's where his passion really gets to come out. Not particularly indie, but planetary.
Oh, yeah.
Like a very indie feel, even though it was a corporate produced book. Back to my original point.
Yeah.
All right.
Once in future, Undiscovered Country, Saga is just brilliant. Like the world's #1 most sexually transmitted comic. Like, how many people
That's a good way to describe
it. Yeah, I mean, there's so much, and I have so many varied interests. I think the first indie book that I really got into was Sin City. If we're gonna discount Vertigo, but I mean, I was probably 14 or so when I came across Doom Patrol. Morrison's Doom Patrol, and that was kind of a watershed moment for me.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a license.
It's great Doom Patrol though.
All right, Ross.
Innovation. Small company. Ran from what? 88 to, I think about 94. Did a lot of adaptations. Did a couple of original comics too. But this was the first indie comic. Indie being an adaptation of something that wasn't DC or Marvel that I got. My mother had to send away on mail order to get this delivered to me. Okay, and I still have it. I mean, I've had a lot of other indie comics I don't have anymore, but this I still have.
I think I've read that one. I think I've read Eros one like a while ago, the Interview with the Vampire one.
Okay.
It was great. Okay, so Nick.
Yeah, Nick.
I'm going to recommend The Plot from Vault to anyone. I really think that will be anyone's a horror obsession. It's not over horror. It's not something that like anybody who's not comfortable with the genre can't handle. It's some of the best comics work I think I've ever seen. And I've read it 5 times now, and there's only 4 issues out. It's I can't get myself away from it. And that's something that Vault you're going to see often. We talked about Vagrant Queen earlier. Vault is doing so much good work. I think there's just The Savage Swords. I will never not recommend that one. It's another horror from them. There's just too much really that to dig into with Vault. I think there's always something cool. A couple of plugs for things that we've talked about here recently at Comic Watch. You can check out, we've got an interview and a review. I worked with the writer of Monitor, and it's called, or his name's Damian Wampler. And the series, it's a Broken Icon Comics, and you can get it on their website. It's a kind of a sci-fi futuristic story about invasion of privacy, pretty much, and the lack thereof. And there's a lot of cool elements in that. Nick Nevin and the Bloody Queen from Humanoids Comics. We've also got an interview that just dropped with Helen Mullane from her, and that is a coming of age horror story. I'm sorry. Oh no, it was a coming of age story that's kind of it's still a horror, but it's very Mignola feeling. It's inspired by a lot of, I believe, Scottish folklore, and it really gets into that super well. So I think there's just so much to kind of get into with that. But I would be more specific. If you're trying to jump into somewhere, go pick up Vault Comics. You can pick up any Vault Comics book just off the shelf, and it's probably going to be great. Like
These Savage Shores.
Yeah, These Savage Shores just, I mean, there's too much from them that I think they're like the rising stars, I feel like, in indie comics, not because they're this IP farm that, Vagrant Queen's kind of tapping into, but they're doing great things with just comics and the way they focus on the comics medium. And they're kind of always topping my list for indie recommendations.
Luna, what about you? What are you down with?
Oh, okay. So I was thinking, because I already have saved some titles. I have saved Monstress, which is like for someone who was a dense story, like very. I think Monsters and Saga are two alike recommendations in the way that you have to deep dive in, like you want something big and beautiful. But I'm gonna get more into the confessional part, like comics that are like about someone's life or like based on the life of the author, because I feel like so. And I want to recommend Tilly Walden's I Like This Part, which is a beautiful comic about 2 teenagers that are in love, and it's like just very beautiful, the panels. And also of Tilly Walden on a Sunbeam, which is a very harsh comic to read because it touches in very like personal issues, and it's semi-autobiographical, and it's also kind of great. And I actually have I Like This Part, but I forgot it on the other room. So I'm gonna recommend also from Sina Grace, who work in Iceman and who like is doing Ghosted in LA right now. But I'm gonna recommend his like autobiographical stuff, which is Nothing Lasts Forever, and Not My Bag, and Self-Obsessed, because these books are like very like they get very into the author like way of thinking, way of creating comics. There's a lot of stuff about doing comics, like about how do I do comics, which is very interesting. I think it's like something I don't usually see in comics, like someone struggling to have inspiration and then have one character appear like, oh, I'm your inspiration. I'm like this Saint Seiya mixed with your hot cross thing. So like, it's very funny also. If someone wants something that is not like these autobiographical things, I recommend it, but something more like fun to read. And also I think we all like are coping right now within like apocalyptic stuff. I would recommend Morning in America, which is an Oni Press book by Madeline Visayo and Claudia Aguirre. and it's really great. It's like very, teenager, dealing with like kind of an invasion stuff, like, very sci-fi, very like apocalyptic thing. That is very great. Those will be my
Awesome.
3.
Awesome. Man, I mean, just to kind of come back around to what we've hammered over and over again, there really is something for everyone. I mean, Grindel was one of my first entry points into indie comics. He's something of the anti-Batman, but it's also a big multi-generational story. Matt Wagner started it back in the early 80s, and there's actually a new installment being published right now. Well, not right now, but it's in the midst of it. If you want, wild and crazy, anything goes type stuff, laugh your ass off, cringe. You can't ever go wrong with Savage Dragon. I'll tell you, as a publisher, I'm loving everything that Ahoy is doing right now. I've just not read a bad book from these guys, and that tells me something just about the quality of their books, because there's all a very fun component to them that a lot of books are missing.
Gone again, buddy.
We have one person left to do.
Okay, hang it back. Oh, that was a short one. Gideon Falls, over. Family Tree is outstanding. And then Rick Remender. There's certain creators I'll follow what they do regardless. Remender's one of them. Brubaker. We talked about his book Friday that he did through Panel Syndicate with Marcos Martin on the last episode. That was just fantastic, and I can't wait for the next issue. No. So
beautiful.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. But God, if it ever comes back, Black Monday Murders by Hickman and Tom Coker was just fantastic book. Although it's been well over a year since an issue was published.
Keeping him busy, buddy.
I know. Well, actually, the last I read about the status update on Black Monday Murders is that the artist Tom Coker was having some health issues that was delaying the book. So, I mean, I can get behind that. Got to do what's right for the creators. So, yeah, that's me. But I mean, there's just so much out there to recommend. Like Cody was saying earlier in the episode, we really are living in an era right now where there's never been more variety and just a wealth of quality comics and diverse voices.
Yeah.
Telling all kinds of different stories from all kinds of different genres.
Yeah, so, I think Janae,
what?
One last question.
Yes.
I guess like I find myself always drawn towards the anthology books, and it's just because I can get through a lot of different types of stories that all have like this one general theme, and it also is nice to support all those different content creators. But with that, just a couple of anthologies that I really love: Twisted Romance from Image. And then also, of course, Hungry Ghosts from Anthony Bourdain. And of course, it's printed through a smaller company, through Dark Horse Burger Books, but still a great anthology nonetheless. Deadbeats from Wave Blue World Publishing Company. Really, really great. It's all about it's horror mixed with music. And so every story within the book has to do something with like, a musical instrument or a curse or a hex coming to you in some sort of way, but it's so good. And then finally, my favorite book right now is Age of Bronze, which is also through an Image, but it's just, I really love mythology. And so it's nice to be able to find something that's kind of niche for me and just be able to pick it up and start reading it and understand all of the references within it.
Very cool.
That's an
if our-
interesting with indie comics and IP using mythology and like these kind of like public characters like that.
Lots of folklore.
Yeah, definitely.
if our commenter is still watching,
Interesting.
Bone, Jeff Smith's Bone for young readers.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Like that is
Wow.
the classic phone book, fantasy adventure cartoon story. Like it's almost untouchable. If you haven't read that, read that.
Yeah.
And I forgot to plug Matt Kint's band.
Yeah. And they even
Bang.
Scholastic stuff now.
Oh yeah.
Okay, what about things that are coming? That, you know, everything's on hold at the moment. Is there anything you got your eye on that's coming out this year?
Ooh.
I've got 2 things already, so I'm good to go because I did some research.
I've got a Kickstarter book that I've been following. It's
So this
like,
was a loaded question by Ross, is what it was.
yeah, that was yeah.
Ambush.
Yeah. Yeah. Bad.
I can't find it now. Because it's tough with the industry, you know, what's coming out when. And like I told
I just look a year ahead. 'Cause
Yeah.
you don't know all the timelines have shifted. I mean, the 2 things, I mean, if I can jump in quickly, if you guys want to just make a list quickly, but one's from Vault, something called Shadow Service. So they've taken the idea of a witch and put her in a James Bond role. So instead of working for MI6, she works for MI666. And I mean, this is just straight up my alley. You know, I love things like the Magic Order and magicians and things like this. But then when you add the James Bond element to it, you're going to have demons and all of that. It's set against like the underbelly of London, and that's from Vault, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. And I think that's somebody named Kevin Scott is the writer. Corin Howell's drawing it, and Triona Farrell's coloring it. And yeah, it's set out to come in July. Well, let's see if that happens. And then there's something from Boom. It's not a series, it's an OGN. It's called Origins. It's about a whole bunch of people I have never heard of, including the artists and the writers. One of the writers wrote The Age of Adeline. I don't know if you guys ever saw that movie, but basically Origins is about 1,000 years in the future. Human beings have been completely wiped away. The world has been taken over by AI, and they reincarnate the human being that actually created the AI because there's some issue that has to be sorted. And it's a one shot, but I mean, I've seen the art, and the art is just through the roof. So that's, you know, I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. Yeah, I think looking forward, the Kickstarter book I'm following is called Metal Shade, and they got successfully funded for the first issue, and I missed out on that pledging time, and they're getting ready to release the first issue on their website within the next month or two, I think. So definitely worth the art on that one is just fantastic. It's crazy. And I think Matt actually tagged me in one a while back from Image, I believe, called Dracula Motherfucker. And oh my god, that one looks
beep beep beep.
Yes.
like
I was actually looking at the preview today.
Yeah, it was like, I know that one's coming out soon, and it's kind of like it's a noir take on vampires. Always interested in something like that, and there are things that we got teased with kind of right before everything happened, and then it's kind of put on hold. So there's going to be a lot of those that I'm kind of just anticipating on finally, coming into our shop or something like that.
I have
Hey, we've got a comment.
idea.
Very cool.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm following also. I have 2 ideas. One is not an upcoming, but it's a comic that is I just remember, and it's also like publishing also right now in this moment, which is a webcomic that we just had an interview published today that is Facing the Sun. I think it's a great webcomic because it's like very well crafted. Teslin writes and draws everything and colors, and it's like very like this story about trauma and like how do you face certain things, like setting the very distant future where everything is technological, and how do you do relationships which are isolated. And I think it's great, and it's publishing every like she's releasing a chapter or a part of a chapter, as the webcomics do, every week. So that's nice for people who want to like follow something. Like every week you have something, and even in those weird times right now. And the other is a Kickstarter that I think is the comic is publishing on May, and it's called Haunting, and it's about a boy who like plays with necromants, but like in a very like how do I say, like irresponsible way, and how that comes to him. And I think the drawing is amazing. It's written by Phil Falco, and the art is by Anna Wesich. And I think that's a great Kickstarter to follow. And I don't know, it looks very, I think maybe I can show the screen, maybe not.
Oh,
It
no.
can't. But it's great. It's like, I think it looks great. I can't wait to read it, like the first full issue. And that's it from me.
We do have a comment in there from my audience plant, my son. Is there any comic you're currently reading right now that almost mimics today's society overall, or even current events?
Ooh.
It's a good question, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned Undiscovered Country just because it's kind of feeling that.
Well, The Resistance from AWA.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did that actually start?
Interestingly enough, Duna mentioned Tapas, which is the site that you get. It's actually AWA has loaded all of their issue 1s onto Tapas and a couple of issue 2s as well. I was actually having a look at it the other day. Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
I'll have to check that
very
out.
much mimics what's going on now in terms of the pandemic and everything else.
I don't know if I would necessarily say it's like current as far as like pandemic, but Mike Norton's Battle Pug just wrapped up a month ago, 2 months ago, the War on Christmas. And not to get in the whole political landscape, but that is just laden with tons of innuendos and, hey, that guy looks familiar. Hey, that world leader looks familiar.
If you follow him on social media,
I'm a fan. Definitely check. What's that?
If you follow him on social media, he's very, very political. And I think it comes into his work.
Yes. Mike Norton is very good at that. But yeah, definitely. And then I would say I want to say it's Judge Dredd Toxic. Through mine, there was a story in there that's kind of I believe it's Toxic. That is kind of maybe can kind of be thrown into what's going on today. Maybe there's some neatly drawn people in there you may recognize from the news and stuff like that. But yeah, I would definitely say War on Christmas and Judge Dredd Toxic would be a good point.
I mean, I guess it's easy to say like apocalyptic comics, right? Like you kind of
pick one at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to the world is ending, like, and it's hard not to do that. But,
like Mad Max and stuff.
Yeah.
So hard because all I'm doing is reading to distract myself from all this stuff that's happening right now. Like I don't want any parallels within my books with what's happening right now.
You want escapism? Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is a good question.
Yeah, ready for my cop-out answer?
Uh-oh.
Yes.
All of them, because comics
nothing
always
wrong.
innately mirror socio-political discourse.
Yeah.
Whether they like it or not, whether they're aware that they're doing it or not, all comics mirror socio-political discourse. So everything is innately tied to what's happening in the world around us.
Yeah.
One could argue that Hex Vet from Sam Davies is not paralleling any of that. Like, that's all fanciful and like cutesy.
I'm not familiar with it. So.
Your kiddo might love it.
I am, and I see your point, but everybody's carrying pajamas right now, and maybe in that way it is related.
Yeah, you're right.
Because everybody's in pajamas right now, and that's kind of cute.
Well, I think with that, we've crossed over an hour, and who knows what'll happen with my internet again, so that's probably as good a place as any to leave it. But,
we might not be able to leave, never.
Oh, God.
What time?
Oh, no.
Perfect time.
I just casted a spell.
Yeah, you cast a spell. Bernard, it was you.
There we go. Okay. So, intermittently, I'm Matt, and this is the Comic Watcher Show. Thank you for everyone for dropping in. Thank you to our commenters, and this has been Indie Comics. Thank you so much. You can check us out on Stitcher, basically anywhere you can find better podcasts. Spotify, the interwebs, iTunes. Thank you very much for tuning in.
He's doing his best Daft Punk impression.
This is the best ending ever.
We need to get Matt a dry erase.